Most people would like to be rich, to have more money. In the governing principles of ancient China, Confucius said, "Riches and honours are what men desire. If these cannot be obtained in proper ways, then they should not be accepted." It means that wealth and high position are what most people want. However, a gentleman, a person with noble characters, would never accept them if they were acquired in ways that do not accord with the Tao. The ancient Chinese also concluded, a gentleman pursues money in accordance with the Tao. What exactly is the Tao in seeking money? Professor Yu Li Liu graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy from Renmin University of China. She is currently a professor at the Department of Philosophy at the Party School of Central Committee of CPC and a mentor for doctoral students majoring in ethics. She is also a visiting professor at Tsinghua College, Sun Yat-sen University. Professor Yu Li Liu has published many academic papers, received a PhD from the University of Hull, UK, and is a postdoctoral scholar at the National University of Singapore. She has been invited to give lectures and participate in workshop seminars in the UK, Italy, the USA, Canada, Australia, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia and Hong Kong. In 2015, 2016 and 2017, she was invited to UNESCO headquarters in Paris to give talks based on the governing principles of ancient China. The central theme of her talks was the importance of the sage's education. In other words, learning from the wisdom of the past and also how to promote moral education. She has contributed greatly towards the dissemination of Oriental culture in the Western world. This video was edited by the Governing Principles of Ancient China translation team of the Pure Land Learning College Association and is based on the lectures by Professor Yu Li Liu.
Dear friends, greetings to you all. Today's episode is titled, What is the Secret to Obtaining Wealth? We have all heard stories about leaders who could have had a comfortable career and achieved higher positions of power and influence. Instead, they ended up imprisoned. Why? Because they had not cultivated their virtue well, so they were trapped by their greed, which they had not yet learned how to let go of. If they had studied the great learning, and if they had known the true reality of things, then they would have been able to let go of greed more easily. In the great learning, it is said, wealth that is obtained using improper means will be lost in inauspicious ways. In the past in China, even those who are uneducated would know that there are two kinds of wealth. The first one is called auspicious wealth. It is gained through hard work and abiding by laws and regulations. Such wealth would bring happiness and auspiciousness. That's why it's called auspicious wealth. On the other hand, inauspicious wealth is what is achieved using deception, bribery, or unlawful activities. Such wealth would bring misfortune instead of happiness. If we had known this when we were confronted with bribery, then we would have refused. I can understand how today people could have lingering doubts upon hearing this. The ancient Chinese anticipated that people of the future would have doubts upon hearing this. So that is why they summarised the inauspicious ways of losing money into the following 5 categories. Having money or properties that are in our possession doesn't mean that we have inherited the right of ownership to them. Proper ownership eventually lies within the following 5 categories. What are the 5? First, the government. For example, let's say that some people had accepted bribes, broken the law, or deceived others. Upon being found guilty, they were imprisoned and their improper gains were confiscated by the government. So regardless of what they had tried to gain, their efforts were in vain. The second category is floods. The money that was gained improperly would be swept away by floods. I'm talking about the broader sense of money and property here, in that they would be swept away along with houses and other assets. The third category is fires. Money gained improperly would be burnt to ashes. The fourth is thieves. In China, there is a saying, "Some thieves follow the Tao." Even thieves would follow the principles of the Tao. They would steal from wealthy people and help the poor. These thieves observed that some wealthy people had gained money using improper means and did not spend any of it helping the poor. They spent great sums of money on their own enjoyment and indulged in excessive pleasures. As a poet pointed out, when rich people behind the Grand Gate are enjoying meat and wine, there are people dying outside the gate from cold and hunger. Some thieves would not tolerate this. They would target such rich people to steal from or even kidnap them. The fifth category is beyond the control of wealthy people, their children. Undutiful children, to be more specific. Those children who rely solely on their parents will squander all the wealth accumulated by their parents. The Chinese reminded us that wealth belongs to one of these 5 categories. Inauspicious wealth will eventually be lost through one of these inauspicious ways. Do not think just because the money is in your hands that it is yours. As the sages concluded in the Great Learning, wealth that is obtained using improper means will be lost in inauspicious ways. In society today, we need to add one more category: hospitals. We often hear that many people with money and power accumulated their wealth through illegal means. To the surprise of many, these people sometimes contracted unexplainable diseases. In order to fight those diseases, they had to spend their fortunes in hospitals, on medical expenses. Why didn't the ancient sages of China identify squandering wealth as the 6th category of inauspicious money? In ancient China, 2 types of people were highly respected by everyone. Who were they? The first type was teachers, and the second was doctors. Why did teachers and doctors receive such high esteem in ancient China? It's because of one primary thing they had in common. They were unselfish in their great contributions to society because they did not attach any conditions to their work. The recipients of their services would merely offer gifts or other means of compensation based on their financial situations. For example, when a doctor was contacted in the middle of the night for an emergency, he would get his medical bag, go and help the patient immediately, without hesitation. He would not inquire whether the person in need was rich or poor, or whether the patient could afford treatment or not. If the patient's family was very poor and could not afford his treatment, what would the Chinese doctor do? He would provide the medicine for free and would not charge them. It was the sacred duty of a doctor to help those who were dying or sick that motivated him. In ancient China, in addition to doctors, teachers behaved the same way. When a teacher who aspired to contribute to a great cause in society saw potential in an impoverished child, the teacher would not charge any school fees. He might even encourage the child's parents to allow the child to study for free. He might even provide an allowance to the child. With great unselfish concern for the welfare of others, these 2 types of people contributed to society without any attached conditions. That is why they were highly respected. Therefore, there was no possibility for doctors or clinics to be an owner of inauspicious money. But society is different today. Many doctors lack moral values. They do not understand the responsibility and the great virtue of being a doctor. Forgetting that the sacred duty of a doctor is to save lives and help those in need, these doctors only treat their profession as a job to make money. They have forgotten the fundamental responsibilities of their profession. Therefore, today, hospitals have become the sixth category of losing wealth. In the Taoist classic titled Taishang's Treatise of Action and Response, there is an analogy that vividly explains the condition for acquiring inauspicious wealth. Those who acquire wealth through unscrupulous ways are like those who satisfy their hunger by eating poisonous meat or quenching their thirst by drinking poisonous wine. Before they could receive even moderate relief from their hunger, they would die from their actions. If one really understands this analogy, would one be silly enough to make money using improper means and then lose money by one of the above six categories? Of course not. After we understand the difference between auspicious wealth and inauspicious wealth, we need to ask a question. How should we best protect our wealth? To answer this question, we need to become acquainted with a man. In the early part of the 20th century, there was a man called Ni Untai, the grandson of Zhen Guofan, a famous statesman who lived in the Qing dynasty. Mr. Ni was the director of the Shanghai Chamber of Commerce. Due to his social status, he had contact with many descendants from the imperial families of the Qing dynasty. He had also witnessed the fall of these families. Sad to see those situations, he wrote a book and documented the true stories of their failures. The book is titled Wealth Protecting Methods. In the book, he tried to remind us that making money is not hard, but protecting and maintaining that wealth for 3 generations or more is extremely difficult. In his book, Mr. Ni told the story of Lin Zexu, a Chinese scholar official of the Qing dynasty, who is best known for his campaign against the opium trade. Why did Mr. Lin strongly advocate the ban of opium in China, and why did he write many petitions to the emperor? Because he saw imperial soldiers with a shotgun on one shoulder and an opium pipe on the other. If opium were not banned, the Chinese would truly become the sick men of Asia. When invaded by foreign powers, they would lack the ability to defend their country. That's why Mr. Lin repeatedly wrote petitions to ban opium. He was then appointed the Imperial Commissioner to ban opium in Guangdong province. On his way to Guangdong, many people tried to bribe him. If he had accepted those bribes, instead of choosing to maintain his integrity, he would have received millions of taels of silver. Seeing the danger of a country in decline, Mr. Lin did not accept any bribes and strongly advocated the banning of opium. Later, Allied forces from 8 countries invaded China, and the Qing government was defeated and forced to surrender. The Qing government agreed to many demands, one of which was to send Mr. Lin to a remote part of the country as punishment. When people consider this, they may ask, what did Lin Zexu obtain by doing what he did? Is it worth doing? He was strict in his ban of opium and accepted no bribes, yet he ended up in a remote area as punishment. Therefore, what he did was something that was not worth doing. However, Mr. Ni said in his book that after the Qing dynasty collapsed, many of Mr. Lin's offspring attained high levels of achievement. Outstanding people appeared in each generation. His great-grandson, Lin Qiang, was even the head of the Supreme Court of China. Mr. Lin's descendants are also of great virtue and have passed on his values. Great people continue to emerge from his clan. Alternatively, there were 3 wealthy families in Guangdong whose fortunes were comparable to that of the whole country. Living extravagantly, they enjoyed delicacies from the mountains and the sea, famous horses and lavish carriages for trips, and expensive clothing made from silk and satin. Why were these 3 families so wealthy? Because they made their money from the opium trade when the country was in desperate times during the Opium Wars. What happened after 3 generations? According to Mr. Ni's records, none of the offspring from these 3 families was outstanding, let alone virtuous. All 3 families declined. Many family members even became beggars. Through such historical records, Mr. Ni has proven to us the truth in the great learning, that wealth that is obtained using improper means will be lost in inauspicious ways. I wish that all leaders would obtain a copy of Wealth Protecting Methods and study it thoroughly. They would understand that it is easy to make money, but extremely difficult to maintain that wealth for 3 generations.
In the last session, Professor Liu quoted from the Great Learning and explained that wealth that is obtained using improper means will be lost in inauspicious ways. She further introduced the concepts of auspicious and inauspicious wealth. She suggested that leaders should cultivate to eliminate greed. They should also acquire auspicious wealth through wisdom and hard work, and avoid inauspicious wealth that was acquired through power and greed, because only auspicious wealth can bring true happiness. Inauspicious wealth, which might be acquired easily, is like poisonous meat and drink. Inauspicious wealth would eventually bring misfortune to oneself and one's family. This is what the ancient sages had concluded. A gentleman pursues money in accordance with the Tao. Tao is a Chinese word for road or path. How should one follow the proper path of pursuing wealth, especially at critical junctions in one's life? How can one make the correct decision to choose the right direction at such times? Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. What is the secret to obtaining wealth?
There are some people who have done important work by summarising the consequences of becoming a corrupt official. What are those consequences? 1. One's career would be ruined. 2. One's wealth would be confiscated. 3. One's reputation would be ruined. 4. One's spouse and children would leave him or her. 5. One would be deserted and betrayed by one's followers and relatives. 6. One would lose one's freedom by being imprisoned. 7. One's health would be ruined due to excessive worry. 8. In the future, one's name would live on in infamy. Even many years later, when the corrupt official's name was mentioned, he or she would be remembered for his or her corrupt ways and would not be forgiven. Therefore, we must understand what to do and what not to do. There is a story in the governing principles of ancient China that could serve as a reminder for us. During the spring and autumn period, there was a prime minister in the state of Lu named Gong Yi-shu. He was an official with integrity who placed restrictions on both himself and his staff. He was very fond of eating fish. Someone who wanted to bribe him brought a lot of fish and chose the best ones to give to Gong Yi-shu. Gong Yi took one look at the fish and refused to accept them. He ordered all the fish to be returned to the sender. Puzzled, the sender asked, "I know you like eating fish. That's why I specifically selected the best ones for you. Why did you reject them and return them to me?" Gung Yi Shu's reply was very meaningful. He said, "It was exactly because I like eating fish that I could not accept them. Why? I am a Prime Minister and can afford to buy fish. If I accepted your fish, I would create a habit of accepting small favours. Over time, I would not be able to control myself. Then, when I went to jail because of my greed, would I still be able to eat fish? Would anyone then send me fish as gifts? Therefore, I could not accept your fish." When we hear this story, we understand how wise some leaders of the past were. They could resist temptation and would not make mistakes. When tempted with profits, the leaders would first consider if such gains would be obtained in accordance with the Tao. If not, the leaders would reject them. Hence, the ancient sages have taught us, do not let your hard-earned reputation be destroyed by one mistake. What does this mean in the current society? We know that many leaders came from rural areas and that their families were poor. They studied hard through primary school as well as through junior and senior high school and then university. When they got a job, they worked their way up to leadership positions. They would have undergone many tests and difficulties along the way before they could achieve their status and position. They would then be able to use their abilities to serve the people. They would also have been able to relieve their parents' worries. However, all these achievements could be destroyed by one mistake. Holding a high position and facing temptation, if they couldn't resist it and made one wrong decision that was exposed afterwards, all their previous good efforts would have been in vain, and what they had gained would soon be lost. What attitude must we have when faced with different kinds of temptation? We must be extremely vigilant, as if we were walking on the thin ice of a river. When we encounter temptations of wealth or sex, we must not become too proud of ourselves. Instead, we need to say to ourselves, I am a leader, and people are trying to lavish me with gifts. They just pretend to like me and want to be my friend. Yes, they are merely enticing you so they can influence you and later push you off a cliff. Once you step off the cliff, will it be possible for you to regret? As we all know, regret comes after the act and is usually too late. The Chinese say, one wrong step leads to thousands of years of regret. This is a reminder to all of us that we need to be very careful with our actions, even when alone in a dark room. Do not think that no one will know what you did when you have done something wrong. We read in the Great Learning that 10 eyes see and 10 fingers point. This means that our behaviour is being observed and criticised by others.
In the last session, Professor Yu Li Liu gave us an example from a book titled Wealth Protecting Methods, written by Nie Yontai, grandson of Song Guofan. In this book, Mr. Nie described Lin Zexu's family as well as 3 wealthy families who sold opium and made their fortunes in Guangdong province. By looking at the various offspring, we can see that wealth that is obtained using improper means will be lost in inauspicious ways. Professor Liu then identified 8 consequences that a corrupt official must suffer. She further quoted a story in which Prime Minister Gung Yi Shu of the state of Lao declined an offer of fish and explained why. He said that if a person who liked to eat fish accepted fish as a bribe, he might end up in prison and thus would not be able to eat fish again. Professor Liu called on leaders to cultivate virtue and eliminate greed. So now, what exactly is the secret to obtaining wealth? Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. What is the secret to obtaining wealth?
A lot of people want to become rich, So what is the secret to doing so? There is another saying in the Great Learning that virtue is the root and wealth is the result. Upon hearing this, some may say that this is precisely the reason why they do not want to study traditional Chinese culture. They say that traditional Chinese culture always says that virtue is very important, while wealth is not. Actually, those who hold this view are mistaken. What exactly do these words mean? They mean that wealth is a result, like leaves and fruits of a tree, while virtue is the root. Have you ever seen a tree with a very large canopy, but a very small root system? If we were knowledgeable about trees and plants, then we would know that when a tree canopy grows, the root grows as well to maintain their proportions to the canopy. This natural phenomenon tells us that the size of a tree's canopy correlates that of its roots, which is the same as wealth and virtue. So Chinese sages have said, "Great virtue possesses great fortune." Wealth is a result, like the leaves and fruits of a tree. They all come from the root, which is great virtue. One who accumulates great good fortune will rise to high positions and enjoy a good reputation. But if one does not improve one's virtue so as to match one's social status, one will experience unexpected misfortune. That's why the ancient Chinese paid great attention to whether a person's fortune and social position matched his virtue. For example, suppose a table can bear a weight of 200 kilograms. If we put 700 kilograms on it, the table will collapse. We can also see similar examples in leaders. A person who would do well as a manager or a section chief, or even as the director of a bureau. However, if one was promoted to the position of a minister, problems could arise. Why? Because when one was promoted to higher positions but had not cultivated a higher virtue to match that position, one might try to take advantage of one's position and benefit oneself. One also might try to gain attention through inappropriate means. What would the result be? One's virtue would not allow one to gain such a high position, so one would end up in trouble. Therefore, it is not true that traditional Chinese culture emphasises virtue and not wealth. The amount of wealth must equal the amount of virtue, which is similar to a tall tree having a very deep root system as its foundation. If the canopy of a tree was larger than the roots, the tree would very likely fall down. If the wealth and virtue of a person are not equal, the person would end up with unexpected misfortunes when the conditions were right. So, what is the proper way to cultivate wealth? We must cultivate virtue first. In the Great Learning, we can find another very meaningful quote. The accumulation of personal wealth is a way to lose people. The giving of wealth is a way to bring people together. What does this mean? When some wealthy people gain even more money, they want to hold on to it. They do not want to help others or reward their employees, clients, or customers. Therefore, no one wants to be around such wealthy people because they have no virtue. Some employees would rather quit. This is called the accumulation of personal wealth is a way to lose people. Therefore, we should do the opposite, which is the giving of wealth is a way to bring people together. We should use money only on important things, those that can help others and assist us, to increase our virtue while reducing our daily mistakes. We should not merely indulge ourselves in extravagant lifestyles. Some may ask, is giving away wealth the same as losing money? Li Bai, a famous poet of the Tang dynasty, wrote in one of his poems that even if thousands of taels of silvers were given away, they'd return. This is talking about the true account of Fan Li, who is worshipped as the god of wealth by the Chinese people. The Chinese are not simply being superstitious when they worship his image. Each image has a symbolic meaning and an educational significance. Why do the Chinese worship Fan Li? Because he knew the secret to wealth and practiced the truth that wealth given away would return. Fan Li was a famous advisor to Go Xian, the king of Yu, during the spring and autumn period. He helped the king restore his country by defeating the state of Wu. Fan Li discovered that the king of Yu was someone who would endure the same hardships as his followers, but would not share his achievements with them. So one day, Fan Li fled in the middle of the night. He arrived at the state of Qi, where he changed his name and started a business. Very quickly he made a fortune. He didn't indulge himself or lead a lavish lifestyle. On the contrary, he gave all his money to support the poor and those who were in need. So he started empty-handed again. Then, with the support of those who had received his help, he was able to make another fortune. Once again, he gave his fortune away to help those in need, just like he did the previous time. He did this 3 times. His deeds were recorded in history as 3 gatherings and 3 givings. People regarded Fan Li as someone who was very good at doing business. He was deeply admired, and people gave him the title God of Wealth. Why did the Chinese people do this? Because they wished that all could learn from Fan Li that the secret to obtaining wealth is the giving of wealth. This secret calls to mind a Chinese saying that giving is gaining. What does this mean? It means that the more you give, the more you gain, and the less you give, the less you gain. Wealth is a result, and its cause is the giving of wealth. We must learn to use our money to help others instead of holding tightly to it and leading a lavish lifestyle. This is why the Chinese pay respect to Fan Li. We are not being superstitious. We shouldn't offer money or fruit in front of his image in the hope that he will help us make money, because that would truly be superstition. The sculptures built by ancient Chinese always have educational meaning behind them.
Previously, Professor Yu Li Liu quoted text from the Great Learning that virtue is the root and wealth is the result. The accumulation of wealth is a way to lose people, and the giving of wealth is a way to bring people together. She explained to leaders that the cultivation of virtue is the true key to wealth. With great virtue, one would have great wealth, which when given away would return. Without virtue, no matter how hard one tries, one would not gain wealth. Fan Li's story is convincing proof. Being a famous politician, a military strategist, an economist, and a Taoist at the end of the spring and autumn period, Fan Li helped the king of Yu to restore his country. He then fled, changed his name, and started a business where he achieved great success 3 times. However, he gave away his wealth 3 times. At the end, his wealth was beyond comparison. The Chinese say he was loyal to his country and used wisdom to protect himself. He engaged in business and made a fortune, and he gained a good reputation for himself. Consequently, he was regarded as the god of wealth. Fan Li's story demonstrates to us that when you give, you gain. The more you give, the more you gain. When you don't give, you simply won't gain. Let us continue with lectures on the governing principles of ancient China. What is the secret to obtaining wealth?
We see that many enterprises don't last very long. According to a report by the World Economic Forum in 2015, the average lifespan of the Fortune 500 companies is between 40 to 50 years. The average lifespan for a large Chinese enterprise is only around 7 to 8 years, while that of a small Chinese enterprise is 2.9 years. When we see the frequent changes in the names of the buildings, in the Shunguan-Chen area of downtown Beijing, we know that the enterprises nowadays don't survive very long. Why couldn't those businesses have sustainable development? If we had studied the Great Learning, we would understand that those businesses could not have sustainable development because they did not follow the rules found in the traditional Chinese classics. It is said in the Great Learning, if one has virtue, one will have the people. If one has the people, one will have the resources. If one has the resources, one will have wealth. If one has wealth, one will be able to function. These are the right steps for running a business. In order to build a business or to achieve a great career, what is the prerequisite? Many would say money or capital. However, the ancient Chinese wouldn't agree. They would put virtue as the first priority. A person of great virtue would attract people of virtue to join him. People would be resources. Therefore, a virtuous person would have all sorts of resources like talented marketing and public relations people and so on. With the resources and everyone's efforts focused on the same goal, the right opportunity would be identified and wealth would be created. This is, if he has the resources, he will have the wealth. And then, if he has wealth, he will be able to function. To function is of great importance too. Where should the wealth be spent to make the business survive and grow? First, employees should be rewarded so that they can have better lives and feel that they are being looked after and cared for by the employer, both physically and mentally. They will then feel very satisfied working in such a business. Second, the business should reward their clients and customers so they can spend less while receiving quality products and services. Third, the business should reward society with its gains. By doing so, each employee would feel good about working in such a business and be proud. Such a business would be well run. It would receive better support and have a better reputation as it continued to grow and expand. Sadly, a lot of people don't practice such things. They think that when operating a business, ability is the first priority. They don't think to attach any importance to virtue. What is the result? Without virtue, even if they are able to make some quick profits, they would lose their credit and their wealth would soon be squandered.
In last section, Professor Liao quoted from the Great Learning, "If he has virtue, he will have the people. If he has the people, he will have the resources. If he has the resources, he will have wealth. If he has wealth, he will be able to function." She told us that virtue is the secret to wealth for ordinary people, business people, and government officials. The best way to make money is to cultivate virtue first. Virtue is the root, and wealth is the result. Virtue is the Tao, in that a gentleman pursues money in accordance with the Tao. Cultivating virtue is the ultimate secret to obtaining wealth.
If we studied the governing principles of ancient China, we would understand that the root of wealth is the giving of wealth and not being greedy, as well as cultivating ourselves and helping others. In order to make our business a sustainable one, we must make virtue our first priority. Great virtue shoulders great fortune. This concludes today's lecture. Thank you.